Thank you for listening to The Lawyer's Daughter. This is Jen Carroll, and this podcast does not have any video. I know I'm on YouTube, but that doesn't matter. I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. Hi, friends. It's September 2nd, and it is day 65, and we are here to talk about the Supreme Court. So I did do the other two podcasts about the Supreme Court on Saturday. I released podcast 67, and it's about the history of the Supreme Court. And what I thought was really interesting is how it came into existence and how it essentially created its own rules. So that's a cool podcast if you want to know about the history of the court. And then yesterday's podcast was about the filings, the court cases that they have ruled on. And you can really see how interesting it is, how they've been ruling in the past compared to the last 2 years. The last 2 years have been a hot mess, which leads us to today's podcast, which is really about preventing this Supreme Court, all the corruption that's going on. So if you want to hear the history, my computer screwed up. I didn't get them out the way I wanted to. They did come out each day, but I didn't publicize them because I was pissed. I was really pissed at my computer. There was a Windows 11 update that came out over the weekend, which I don't know why they picked Labor Day weekend to do this, maybe to make us cry. At least that's how mine ended up. So here I am. Again, I'll just for anybody that's new, I'll emphasize that I write these first as a blog. So if you'll always find links to my blog posts, you can always go in there and look at it again or get the citations, which is the articles that I use to create the content. And the blog, and I've tried to fix the jcarroll.com/do something, do-something, like Michelle Obama said, do something page to be more accessible. So if there's something you're looking for information about, I might have it in the podcast already. I've already done 35 of these suckers, or 34 of these suckers. So, which is shocking to me, but I really want to help people feel excited about our democracy. And I really want them to engage with the election. So that's what we're doing here. And then of course, I really, really want you to elect Kamala and the coach, but that's just me. Watching Tim at the Minnesota State Fair this weekend has been a hoot. And now I need to try some of Martha's cookies. I cannot believe how good those looked. But I've been jonesing for a chocolate chip cookie for a while now. I keep going to that. Brief aside. There's this cookie shop in Santa Cruz called Pacific Cookie Company. Super good, very local. And their bakery is in a weird part of our town. And I went over to the bakery because I want to get it at the outlet. Because, good cookies taste even better if you get a deal on them, especially when you're don't have a lot of cash in your life like me right now. And I'll be damned if that store wasn't closed, as I've been jonesing for chocolate chip cookie. And those Minnesota State Fair chocolate chip cookies, I think they're called Martha's cookies, looked amazing. All right, let's go back to this depressing Supreme Court, because that's what we're supposed to be talking about. I could talk to you all day about just anything, but we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, because here's the deal. The Supreme Court is like a referee in democracy. Their job is to ensure everyone's following the rules of the game. Think about that, the referee. So if our referees are not actually calling balls and strikes or first downs, look at me, I'm flexible like that, or goals or no goals, or offsides. I know some sports, yes I do. Then we got a problem. When a case comes to the Supreme Court, the justices examine how people or the government apply the law. So somebody somewhere has said, oh, this is how the law is supposed to be applied. And it bubbles its way up through appeals. If there's a problem with it that we think it's unconstitutional, then it bubbles its way up and it could get to the Supreme Court. Now, unfortunately, cases can also get turned into weapons and intentionally brought before the Supreme Court because people are trying to change the laws, which is what happened in Dodd, which is what took away our rights as women to get health care. So people still game the Supreme Court. The problem is, even if you game it, it's not supposed to work. So that's where we have our problem right now. We have some significant problems that have happened in the last couple of years, most noticeably, overtly. And the problems have been around for a while, but it's been very overt. And the problems could make it harder for the court to do its job correctly. And it really is a big deal because it affects everybody in the country, as we learned from Dodd's when they took away women's health care. So here we go. Here's why ethics are so important. We have 9 justices in the Supreme Court, and their decisions impact the whole country. 9 people. They're supposed to act fairly and honestly. But here's the catch. Unlike other federal judges who must follow a strict rules of conduct, the Supreme Court justices don't have the same rules. Now, if we go back to the history of the court, I suspect it's a little bit of the God complex, right? Doctors have it. I think a lot of pastors have it. I for sure think some judges have it. We can tell by their rulings. There's a judge who released someone on Twitter. They didn't release them on Twitter. There was a story today on Twitter of a judge who released a police officer back to his family. The wife was trying to get a restraining order, and he went on to rape his daughters. So I don't know if they're stepdaughters or not. What I'm saying is that we have judges who are activists, meaning they make rulings that aren't necessarily conforming to the law, or they just use their own personal judgment. If that's the God complex, I think is what allows them to rationalize it in their head, which is they know better. And I suspect by the very nature of a Supreme Court, it's attracted men. Let's be honest, it started with the men with the God complex, who at the beginning, when they founded the court, decided they didn't need rules for the Supreme Court justices because they would be above the rules. They're that good of humans. That's how I was raised in my house. My dad held up Supreme Court justices as examples of almost perfect humans. Yet another institution breaks my heart because I grow up to find out that we have super corrupt people on our court. And it bums me out. I can't even tell you, especially for someone like me raised in a household where judges were held in some of the highest regard ever. And my dad aspired to be a judge, which has its own irony later, but you're going to have to follow my other story on that one. So you might wonder how the court could be corrupted. And it's so parallel to cybersecurity for me. The biggest way the court is corrupted is by the individual choices made by the 9 justices. Now think about this. For any of you who have raised kids or watched kids or know about kids or know about animals, you reward people based on their choices. We reward them and we encourage. So when kids make good choices, we tell them it's a good choice. And when they make bad choices, we tell them it's a bad choice and what their other choices were. And it really comes down to knowing how to use your brain to make good choices. Seriously, it's that easy. In cybersecurity, because people are the number one way we know we can break into an institution is through a human. Every time. Humans are the missing link. They're the ones who break cybersecurity, and clearly they're the ones who break our court. Humans are the flawed individuals who get us to where we are. Okay, so historically, as you could imagine, justices are expected to act with honor and integrity simply because of the importance of their role. There you go. However, in today's world, I don't know if it's in today's world, but in today's world where money has found its way into politics in unprecedented ways, relying on honor isn't just enough anymore. That's right. We've sacrificed honor as another institution we've let go of. Honor used to be a norm. Honor was something that kept you from going to Arlington Cemetery and shiting on the people who are laid to rest there for their service in our country, and then making it a political stink. That's not honor. All right. So it's time, many believe, it's time for the Supreme Court justices to follow the same ethical guidelines as other federal judges. As in, many believe, let's just say, come on, I think it's time this is a norm. So, loyal to whom? How outside money is influencing the justice? Let me tell you what. Here are the scandals. I'm just going to take you through them. You may or may not have heard about them, but let me try to explain what's going on. 1, we have justices who are getting paid to deliver the goods. Now, remember a long time ago I talked about causation and correlation. So it's easy to prove there's a relationship between two things. It's harder to prove one thing caused the other. I cannot prove to a level of causation that Clarence Thomas did bad things because of the money he was given, but I can tell you there's a correlation, and that one thing and the other thing both existed at the same time, and any smart person could put it together. So that's what I'll tell you. Again, no causation, but definitely a correlation. So Justice Thomas has come under scrutiny for accepting luxury gifts and benefits from a mega donor. That movie Megan was good, right? That was a good movie. Harlan Crow. Maybe we could put Harlan Crow in the Megan movie, and Megan could take care of Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow's the one with the Hitler Museum, just so you're clear. I want you to know who we're talking about. Yep, he has a Hitler Museum of all kinds of Hitler stuff because that's what's important to him. I have a yarn museum because yarn is important to me. But Harlan, no, it's Hitler memorabilia. Harlan gave Thomas luxury vacations such as Crow's private resort in the Adirondacks. Is that a cool place? I've never been to the Adirondacks. We have the Sierra. His estate in Texas, so you got to stay down at the estate in Texas, as well as multiple private jet flights and yacht cruises. Additionally, Harlan purchased properties owned by Thomas and his family, including the house where Thomas's mama resides, and made significant improvements to the property. This real estate transaction, valued over $100,000, was not disclosed, raising further concerns. By the way, I'm completely pay for play. If Harlan wants to pay me to do something, I'm not going to do anything gross, but the hell, I'll take $100,000. Just kidding. Never. Okay, beyond the lavish experiences, Crow also paid for the private school tuition of a relative of Thomas, who Thomas was raising as a son. Of course, he was sending him to private school, so that raising part is a little bit, he didn't have to put up with them every night, like I did reading the Odyssey and the Iliad, which made me want to slip my wrists. Crow's gifts included historically significant items such as a Bible once owned by Frederick Douglass. Why Thomas would want that, I'll never know. And a bust of Abraham Lincoln. No, not Abraham Lincoln's bust. A bust, meaning the head and shoulders of Abraham Lincoln. Again, that's really weird. The acceptance of these gifts, along with the lack of transparency and disclosure, sparked widespread criticism and led to calls for a formal code of ethics for the Supreme Court. By the way, he didn't claim them. He just took all this stuff but never claimed it. And I think you've seen his RV. If you haven't, go over to watch John Oliver and talking about Clarence's. In fact, I'm going to go find that video and drop it right in this blog. It is that good. It's hilarious, actually. So I also provide for you in the blog a timeline of Clarence Thomas's gift because someone graciously put that all together for us. Now let's move to our next Justice Sam Alito. He faced criticism for accepting undisclosed gifts and benefits from wealthy donors. One notable one involves a lavish fishing trip to Alaska where he was hosted by billionaire Paul Singer, a hedge fund manager. One of Jen's red flame lights flashing words, hedge fund managers. I swear to God, I would love to read one of these stories where hedge fund manager has like a good, it connotes a good thing happened. Sorry, I digress. I'm going to keep saying Brett Turhan, I digest. Whose business's interests? Okay, Paul Singer's business's interests have come before the court. The trip involved travel on a private jet valued at $7,000, and Alito did not report this in his financial disclosures. There you go. Look at those humans not acting like good, honorable humans. The omission raised serious ethical concerns as the hedge fund was later involved in cases before the Supreme Court. Clutching my pearls, I am just shocked. Have you met Sam Alito? You wouldn't want to just hang out with him. As smart as he thinks he is like not a fun guy. In addition to the Alaska trip, Alito's been linked to other instances where he reported accepted hospitality and benefits from individuals and business interests. This all rolls up to say that we need to start to govern our highest court in the same way we govern all our other federal judges. Next up, Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch. That's what I'm going to call him, Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch. Say that with a Invisalign. That's hard. He faced scrutiny over a real estate transaction involving selling a property he co-owned. Right after he was confirmed to the Supreme Court in 2017, he sold a 40-acre property in Colorado, to the chief executive of Greenberg Traurig, a major law firm with extensive business before the court. The property had been on the market for 2 years with no interest, but sold 9 days after Gorsuch was confirmed. The sale attracted criticism due to the timing. Really? Just the timing? That was the red flag? Like it sat there for 2 years and it was snapped up 9 days later? By a firm, by a chief executive has cases coming before the court. Fascinating. Because it couldn't just be somebody like, Mom Pa Kettle buying it. No, it has to be somebody who has an agenda, because that's how this rolls. This transaction creates the appearance of a conflict of interest, even if there was no wrongdoing. It does. It does create the appearance of a conflict of interest. You can't do that crap. So there's three judges up there, but wait, there's more. Sam Alito has also come under scrutiny for flying flags. So that's all the money stuff. Now let's go to attitudes and values and, oh yeah, moral authority. Alito was under scrutiny for flying flags associated with the controversial political movements at both of his homes. I don't know if he has more than two, but both of his homes were involved. And it raises concerns about his impartiality. In January 2021, shortly after the coup, the insurrection, the attempted coup, an upside down American flag, a symbol that had been adopted by those who falsely claim the election was stolen, um, was was viewed outside Alito's Virginia home. Okay, this is down in Virginia, all right? And according to the reports, when the flag was seen flying outside, Alito stated, this is his quote, he said this, he personally had no involvement whatsoever in the flag's display, and he explained it by saying, my wife put it out there, Martha Ann. There's always named Martha Ann. Come on. Why did we call them Karens? We should have called them Marthas. It was placed briefly by his wife, Martha Ann Alito, in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insultive language on yard signs. I think it was a gay flag. I think it was a gay flag. There you go. That people can't take it. The gay flag is, you should see. I've seen it attack people under the cover of darkness. Gay flags just come whipping out of the dark, and they try to knock you down. I'm just kidding. Please, no, I'm just kidding. Additionally, Alito displayed an Appeal to Heaven flag at his New Jersey beach house, a symbol historically tied to the American Revolution, but more recently associated with Christian nationalism and the Stop the Steal movement. These flags are not just ordinary displays of patriotism, they are potent symbols connected to divisive, partisan causes, and particularly the efforts to overturn the results of a democratic election. Having a Supreme Court justice display these kinds of flags raises questions about his ability to remain impartial, and it especially concerns us that there is fairness, and the lack of bias that's operating. When you show flags like that, it's hard to believe you could show up to court and be fair, because you're in the highest job in the country. If you want to say this is free speech, you can say it's free speech, but it's going to reflect on your job, just like the free speech people who are driving their company truck and say racist crap and lose their job. Same thing. Sometimes I remember when I was elected as class president, and we were in our first days of leadership, and I was so excited because I just wanted to be class president, and I really was excited about learning about leadership. And the first thing Bob Kuzar told us, and he was so serious, like, I took this so seriously. He had us all in there, and he, said we ran good campaigns and did all that stuff. And he said, now, let me explain to you what you signed up for. As a student leader, you will be judged both inside and outside of this school. Everything you do all the time will be judged because you are a student leader. So guess what? You don't get to act like a fool. He just laid it out. And from that day forward, I really understood that my reputation and my brand mattered not just when I was doing the thing that I cared about, but mattered when I wasn't doing the thing, which is one of the reasons. It's funny because I do this podcast absolutely just for me. I do it for you, but I just do it. I don't get paid is what I'm trying to say. I do it because I care about it a lot, and I care about us being honest and being ethical and moving in this country in a way that lifts others up. And so that value of mine, you're going to see that at work. You're going to see it everywhere because it just comes through. So that's what the issue is with these guys putting up flags. This really speaks to their underlying values, who they are as people. And that matters because they took a job that requires them to be decent humans 24/7. It just does. Okay, and then there's this involvement in the coup itself. Free speech until it isn't, right? When a justice is associated with symbols like the flags, it undermines the perception of neutrality. But it's even worse when your wife, Ginny Thomas, has involvement in overturning the results of an election. She was a prominent conservative activist and it was communicating with key figures in the Trump administration on that day Prior to and up and including January 6th, she was in touch with John Eastman, Trump's legal advisor, who was very important in formulating the challenge to the election results. She communicated with Mark Meadows, urging him to continue his efforts to overturn Biden's victory, and even reached out to Arizona lawmakers to encourage them to select an alternative slate of electors despite Biden's clear win in the state. That is some corrupt shit, guys. And she is the wife of one of our Supreme Court justices. And by the way, she hasn't been arrested. It's my understanding she helped fund the buses that got the people there. Like, she needs to be investigated. And I know people are investigating, but maybe this will be something we can get to the bottom of once we get Attorney General who's like fired up. I don't think Merrick's that fired up. I think he's tired. I think he needs to go home. So the fact that Ginny Thomas publicly expressed belief in the false claims of the election and continues to press that there's fraud indicates that there is direct alignment between what the court says and does and what their spouses and family members are doing. So, and in fact, Judge Thomas was the only one who was the dissenting vote when the Supreme Court had to rule to allow the January 6th committees to access Trump admin documents. Justice Thomas didn't want the January 6th investigation to have access to Trump's documents. He voted no. So he's not even for ethics when it has nothing to do with him. He wants to go ahead and keep everything secret. So, all right. And then the last thing is, if you're worried your colleagues might change their minds on a vote, the thing to do is to leak it, right? Leak what's going to happen. So Justice Alito authored the Supreme Court decision, which was shared via the leaked draft opinion of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. This was the thing that turned over Roe v. Wade. This marked an unprecedented breach in the court's history. They don't leak stuff. The court doesn't leak. It was published in May 2022, months before the final decision, and the leak sparked a widespread public outcry, leading to protests and heightened tensions. Remember, we all just got scared to death because we're like, oh my God, this is what they're going to rule. They're going to take it away. And still we wanted to deny it because it just seemed so un-American. And this leak really shook public trust in the courts. The leak suggested there was an internal conflict within the court, and it raised concerns again about the integrity of decision-making. So the speculation is that the leak was done to lock in the result by making it harder for any justice to change their vote once the draft was publicized. So if someone were to have leaked it early, it shows how people were leaning, but they weren't done yet. They hadn't made it official. And so some of those justices could have decided it was too strong, too intense, too rude, too awful, that they might have pulled back. But no. By leaking the draft, then they looked like they might have changed their minds and been flipper floppers. And flipper floppers are the worst, especially when they're flipping and flopping before you even know what they think about it, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look at an issue from all sides. Damn it. Anyway, the entire episode has led to calls for reforms, obviously. And so this is just more upon more. So we have 4 massive things happening in the court. We have money and gifts. We have flags and sharing values that are leaking out and showing us the bias. So we have bias. We have participation in the coup. And then finally, we have the idea that you could leak a document to make sure you lock down what you want to have happen, which sounds so corrupt, I can't even stand it. In the meantime, one of the things the Supreme Court has is a Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice is like, the person who runs the dorm. It's the massive RA on there. It's the one who's in charge and tells you how you're supposed to behave and holds people accountable. If not overtly, at least with that look, that you can give somebody that says, really? Are you going to get it together now? Or I'm going to have to come for you. Robert's got that look, but it turns out he's not that interested in using it. He has become increasingly aligned with the court's more conservative wing. The shift has raised concerns about his role in maintaining the judiciary's integrity, and he's faced criticism for his perceived reluctance to take action on ethics reforms. I mean, he's just downright said, none ya, as in none ya business. Sandra. That was an homage to your dad. So that's what Roberts has done. His stance involving voter rights and executive power has often relied with the interests of conservative and pro-Trump factions, leading to accusations that he abandoned his earlier institutionalist approach in favor of a more ideological driven agenda. The shift has been really evident in recent terms because he has increasingly joined Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas in decisions that undermine long-standing legal precedents and erode public trust in the court. That word was erode that I just stepped on. All right, so what? That is not going back in time. That is my sound effect for Send in the Heroes. Supreme Court Ethics. Oh, wait, sorry, this is the name of it. The Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act of 2023. That's right. The Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act of 2023. Yeah, it has not been ratified at all. This is something that White House, Durbin, there's some others that have worked on this legislation, and it's really good. It's a formal code of conduct, similar to governing over federal judges. It requires the justices to adhere to strict ethical guidelines. It includes mandatory disclosure of gifts, etc. And guess what? And it also has mechanisms for investing violations. But look, I just did this thing simultaneously. And guess where the act is now? That's right. It's sitting there. It's got shelved because the Republican House didn't want to bring it to the floor. So this is a problem, but we have an act that's out there, and it really it talks about kind of three big things. So here's the three big ways we could reform the court. And we don't really have final version of this, but I suspect once the Democrats, if we can get the Democrats in the House and the Senate and the executive branch, we can put these reforms in place. And they're likely to look at three things. One is ethical oversight. So the rules that were just talked about in the act, managing ethical behaviors, doing more to get them to claim gifts, preventing them from taking gifts. Cops apparently are not allowed to even accept a cup of coffee in New York City. That's how hard they go on cops. And frankly, I had no problem if a cop gets a cup of coffee. But the problem is, the minute you don't have bias, right? Now you know the cops aren't protecting my store because I gave them coffee and a scone. Oh, and by the way, I don't eat scones, so I don't know why scone popped up in my mouth. I was going to say cinnamon roll because that's what I really, really want is a cinnamon roll after talking about cookies. Anyway, so the idea is that more ethical oversight is the way to go here. And they would rebuild public trust and clarify the justices' role that they are not above the law. And this probably is the first thing that will attack some of that God complex. The next thing is the term limits for justices. And that it's funny. I'm 62 years old and I'm having a hard time finding a job. And yet I have more experience than I've ever had, which is what's true about people as they get older. You want them, they're seasoned. You might think that I'm slower at some things. On the other hand, I know what to do, and I can pretty much tell people what to do with their marketing super fast because I just know it works and I know how to do it fast. That's just like kind of a Jen Carroll thing. Well, if this is what I have a problem with term limits, is that you don't want to just necessarily street people because they're old. On the other hand, there's a time when people have outlived their usefulness. And I do think aging for some of these things that require knowledge of the current culture, that's my caveat. One of my biggest things in cybersecurity is I stay current. Same in marketing. I got to stay current. That's the trick. And what I see about a lot of our lawmakers, a lot of our old white men that are in these jobs, is they don't understand the culture. Probably they never did. J.D. Vance is such a poster child for having no clue about the culture. Then I'm going to have you flip over to Tim Walz, who is, I guess, my age, which he feels older, but he isn't. He's just, put in a lot of good years. He is so aware of the culture. And when he isn't, he knows he isn't, and he looks to hope his daughter or others to help him know what's right for the culture. That's being a good older person. That's your job as an older person. You got to know the culture. You can't tell people the way it was done years ago. Nobody cares. It all changed. That isn't how it's done now. It just isn't. In fact, we've even ruined college for kids who can't go in person because college online feels like social media. And it's almost impossible to learn when you're in a social media like experience. So what I'm saying is that the key to term limits is that if you're going to have older people, they've got to know what's going on in the world, so then they don't make rulings that ignore how our world is changing. Oof, got on the soapbox there, but it's because it's weird to be this age and try to find out, do I still have value to the common ethos, or do I not? And then finally, expanding the number of justices, which I think is probably really a good idea. Taking it from 9 to 13, 4 members is what they're talking about. And it will hopefully dilute some of these very extreme values-driven decisions. It shouldn't be about values. It should be, I'm not saying they don't come with a bias. Humans just have a bias. It's just true. It's almost impossible for humans to be unbiased, but we can work very hard to manage our bias. And that's what we're really looking for. And by expanding the number of justices, it could either make it more political, but I have a feeling it will actually broaden and include the diversity that we need, that's represented in a country now, that we need a more diverse court. All right, so I'm wrapping this up, but when we fight, we win, right? Isn't that what Kamala and Tim say? When we fight, we win. So we're going to fight. We're going to safeguard the future of the Supreme Court by voting for Democrats this fall, all the way down, guys. We've got to get the Senate, we've got to get the House, and honestly, we need to protect the judges we're hiring now, because we want them to grow up to be judges that move up the judge food chain, right? They got to become appellate judges and federal judges and all those good things. So this is the issue. We need to fight, we need to win, and we need to vote for Democrats so we can get the Supreme Court fixed and we can get our rights and we can begin protecting our rights again, like I grew up with. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. Thank you for listening today. We're going to dive in. The debate's coming up on September 10th. So we're going to dive into issues into this week. I'm going to try to make it dishy. I'm going to see what I can find to dish about during these issues, because that's what makes it fun, right? We'll see if I can find some examples of things that make looking at what these folks want to do for us even more personal and more interesting. Thank you for listening today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.